Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. Today we're going over the Avvar and the Chasind. They are two tribes that broke away from the original Alamari, who were the first humans to settle in Ferelden. The Alamari actually broke into three groups: the Avvar, the Chasind, and the Clane. The Clane later became the nation of Ferelden we know today, while the Chasind settled in the Qunari wilds and rejected their rule. The Avvar, on the other hand, isolated themselves in the Frostback Mountains. Of course, the people of these tribes have mixed views, and so while some are friendly to outsiders, others are hostile. Let's dive into the Chasind. The Chasind are considered to be barbaric, but that's unfair. They're just different. They have settlements, but due to living in swamplands, they aren't typically what we would think of as cities. Their culture is pretty interesting. For one, they have mage shamans. Evidently, this has not led to the end of the world, abominations running rampant, or mage supremacy. So, there's that. Anyway, the Chasind are very in touch with nature. This comes across in their artwork and even their weapons and battle tactics. They expertly use terrain to their advantage, though the Chasind are also considered to be superstitious. One interesting thing they do is they model weapons in the likeness of animals. The reason for this is in case they slay someone beloved by the gods may get confused and blame the animal instead. Now, if we consider spirit behavior, this actually makes total sense. Let's talk about their gods for a minute. Very little is known about the Chasind religion, but based on that thing with the weapons, it's fair to assume they worship spirits like the Avvar, though they're probably very different in how they honor them, how they communicate, and so on. There's honestly not much to say on the Chasind, and that's rather disappointing. I'd love to see more. In my Beyond Thedas episode, I talk about the Agadi, which are a culture formed of Chasind exiles. They live in snowy mountains that are meant to be inhospitable. This piques my curiosity. I want to see these people, and I definitely want to see what may be hidden in those mountains. Moving on, it's time we talk about the Avvar. The Avvar have a lot more to go through. Let's start with the basics. The Avvar mostly live in the Frostback Mountains. They're divided into holds, and they worship spirits as gods. Speaking of which, there's one scene in Jaws of Hakon I love. It's when you bring Solas to meet with the guy who oversees the fighting arena. The guy explains it, and Solas remarks on how amazing it is how they draw in spirits with those fights so they'll then aid the Avvar in real combat. I remember seeing that for the first time and really being impressed the same way Solas was. I mean, first of all, surprising Solas with ingenuity involving spirits is deserving of props on its own. But also, impressing me. I was blown away by how genius that was. Mad props to the writers for impressing me with a new application of their own lore. I don't even know why, but this simply amazes me. Alright, enough gushing about that. So, the Avvar worship spirits, but they attribute them to overarching gods? I'm still unclear as to how this relationship works. Let's use Hakon as an example. I assumed he was some variety of rage demon, or maybe a demon of war, if that's a thing. Though he'd apparently been missing for 800 years. Were there no other spirits of his type that could have replaced him? Was it specifically that one? But then how do other spirits factor into that? Are they more like demigods? Or godly servants to greater gods? I honestly don't know. If you guys can figure it out, be sure to let me know in the comments. This leads me to a bit of criticism about the Avvar. You see, I had long wished for a culture that worshipped spirits in Dragon Age. I was glad they finally did that with the Avvar, but they had already established the Avvar had their own gods such as Korth and the Lady of the Skies. Personally, I would have rathered they'd given the spirit-worshipping culture to the Chasind. But this is where we are. I also want to mention the theory that Hakon is Gilderon. The main idea behind this is that we find Gilderon's claim in the Frostback Basin, and that little chamber allowed the old Jaws of Hakon to work ice magic in unique ways, and they worshipped Hakon and tried to get him to possess a dragon. A fair theory, but we honestly don't know enough about the Forgotten Ones to say for sure. Specifically, Gilderon seems very prideful. During the fight with Hakon, he taunts you, claiming he is Hakon Winter's Breath, and seems to revel in the fight, which makes sense if he is the god of war. But I'm honestly not sure Gilderon would behave the same way. Granted, we're working with a small sample of his character, but it just doesn't seem to match to me. But then again, it could all be part of his plan to assume a new identity and hide his true intentions. Who knows? I believe Hakon is a spirit/demon, and Gilderon is a different entity and has a plan of his own. But be sure to let me know your own thoughts in the comments. Now, I do want to talk about the other Avvar gods. One in particular stands out, Qunari the Mountain Father. Let's not beat around the bush with this theory. Qunari is a titan underneath the Frostback Mountains, the same one that may have saved Liliana. As for evidence about this, there's not much beyond the suspicious circumstances, but I'm fairly confident that Qunari is a titan. Let's get into it. We start with the Avvar connection to the Dwarves. One, it's believed Qunari created the Dwarves, and given their relationship to Titans, well, yeah. It's also believed that Qunari is the one who made all the caves in the Frostbacks. It's also believed that Qunari is as old as the Frostbacks themselves. That's a little weird given the fact that the Avvar came from elsewhere. The Alamari tribes fled from the west, and the Avvar settled in the mountains. Well, in any event, the parallels of Qunari creating the Frostbacks cave systems and the Dwarves does seem to suggest he may actually be a Titan. Maybe it's a bit of a stretch, but it's not unreasonable. It does get to be a problem because despite having 2 DLCs devoted to these subjects, we know very little about how Titans work or how the Avvar gods work. Now, I do want to talk about Belenas. In the Frostback Basin, we can find an astrarium connecting to the constellation Belenas. The tale explains that Qunari had a throne at the top of the tallest mountain in the world, Belenas. It's also mentioned in the Codex entry for the Frostback Mountains, or A Tale of the Frostbacks as it appears in Inquisition. It says Belenas was at the center of the world, but I wouldn't take that to mean much, since A, the entire planet hasn't been charted, and B, really you could make the case that anywhere you are standing is the perfect center of the world. Anyway, back to the tale from the constellation. It says that men kept trying and failing to reach the top, until Sindri's Skybreaker finally made it and Qunari rewarded him greatly. After Sindri's Skybreaker, many more climbed to the top and expected the same treatment. So Qunari asked the Lady of the Skies to pull his city into her realm so he wouldn't have to host any more parties. Now that could be taken as mythology, where the constellation is the mountain, now existing in the sky. Or we could take it more literally and assume it was pulled into the Fade, which could perhaps suggest that Belenas is where Arlathan once stood. Now in the Fade, which is commonly referred to in elven mythology as the sky. Now it's worth noting that there is another explanation for Belenas' disappearance. In the Codex entry for Lake Calenhad, it said that that is where the mountain of Belenas was, but it was destroyed when Qunari battled a great serpent named Nathramar. When the Lady of the Skies saw that Belenas was gone, she wept, and her tears filled the crater left behind with water, thus creating Lake Calenhad. Conflicting stories, but both show a relationship between Qunari and the Lady, and both seem to have similarities to elven lore. It could all be mythology, or an embellished account of a true story. There's also the poem Where Once We Walked, which directly relates to an elven story. According to this translation, these basically say the same thing. This just goes to show that the Avvar culture has some elven connections. It's worth noting that Sarah begins reciting this poem to the Inquisitor during one of her roof scenes.
When waked, we walked where willows wail, whose withered windings were sail. It's poetry because of W's and shit.
So let's recap. The Alamari split into 3 groups, the Clane, the Chasind, and the Avvar. The Clane morphed into the Kingdom of Ferelden, the Chasind isolated themselves in the Qunari wilds, and the Avvar isolated themselves in the mountains. We don't know much about the Chasind, but it seems they revere spirits in a similar way as the Avvar. The Avvar see spirits as gods. How their specific gods relate to the more common spirits is unclear. Qunari the Mountain Father may be a Titan, Hakon might be Gelderon. The mountain of Belenas is said to have vanished. The Avvar legends of why it vanished are conflicting, but in any event it could be that Belenas is where the city of Arlathan once stood before it was pulled into the Fade and became the Black/Golden City, but that's like 3 theories piled into one. And the Avvar have some elven influences because of course they do. Elves, all the time elves, everywhere elves, forever elves, all of the elves. I don't mean to say I don't like it, Bioware, it is interesting. I would just like a break from elves once in a while. So that's it for now, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Don't forget to comment and like, and remember, Tala Nadas.